The message came at 03:47 hours Earth Standard Time, when Admiral Jack Morrison was drinking his third cup of coffee in the command center of Luna Defense Station. The transmission pierced through every communication channel humanity possessed. With such force that backup systems across the solar system automatically activated, Lisa Harper rushed into the command room carrying a data tablet that showed readings she had never seen before. The holographic display materialized above the central console, showing 12 different alien species arranged in what could only be described as a council of judgment. Their leader stood in the center wearing robes that seemed to shift between colors that human eyes could barely process. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, though its mouth moved in ways that suggested the language was being translated by technology far beyond human understanding. Humans of the third planet, the being began. You have reached the attention of the hegemony that governs this section of the galaxy. We have observed your rapid expansion beyond your home world and your development of technologies that could eventually threaten established order. You now face a choice that 847 species before you have confronted. Jack Morrison felt his stomach drop as he realized this was not a greeting or invitation to join some galactic community. Lisa Harper moved closer to the display as if studying every detail might reveal some weakness or deception. The alien continued speaking with a voice that carried no emotion, despite delivering words that would change everything. You may choose complete integration into our collective as a managed species. Your people will be relocated to designated worlds where you will serve purposes beneficial to galactic stability. Your population will be maintained at sustainable levels. Your basic needs will be provided. Your culture will be preserved in archives, though its practice will be regulated according to hegemony standards. Dr. Peter Kane burst through the security door, still wearing his laboratory coat covered in chemical stains. He had been working on quantum communication experiments when the transmission began, and his equipment had detected energy patterns that defied every law of physics humanity understood. He stared at the alien figures with the wide eyes of a scientist confronting proof that human knowledge was pitifully limited. The alien leader gestured, and new images appeared showing human colonies that Peter recognized as recent settlements on the outer rim of explored space. The images shifted to show these same colonies reduced to empty craters and planetary surfaces. Ships that had taken humanity decades to build were shown being destroyed by weapons that seemed to require no visible energy source. The alternative to integration is immediate termination of your species. We have demonstrated our capability to eliminate your settlements and vessels without significant resource expenditure. Historical records of the 847 species who faced this choice are available for your review. 731 chose integration and continue to exist in managed states. 116 chose termination and no longer exist anywhere in this galaxy. Lisa Harper began recording everything while simultaneously sending emergency signals to Earth and every human outpost within communication range. The readings on her instruments showed that the alien transmission was somehow reaching every human communication device simultaneously, regardless of distance or technological compatibility. Jack Morrison found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. What time frame are we given to make this decision? The alien's response came without hesitation. 72 hours from the conclusion of this transmission. No extensions will be granted. No negotiations will be entertained. No third options exist. Choose integration or choose termination. More images appeared showing other alien species living under hegemony rule. They seemed healthy, and their basic needs were clearly met, but something in their expressions suggested that whatever made them unique had been carefully removed. Their cities were clean and efficient, but lacked the chaotic creativity that characterized human settlements. Their people moved with purpose, but without the unpredictable energy that humans considered normal. Peter Kane stepped forward, studying the technical data streaming alongside the visual presentation. The energy requirements for what you're showing us should be impossible according to our understanding of physics. Your understanding is limited, the alien replied. This is why integration is preferable to termination. Managed species eventually learn to accept their limitations rather than struggle against forces beyond their comprehension. The transmission continued for another hour, showing detailed records of species that had chosen integration. Each civilization had been given the same choice: Each had faced the same demonstrations of overwhelming power. The successful ones had quickly adapted to their new roles, while those who resisted too long had been eliminated as promised. When the transmission finally ended, the command center fell into complete silence. Jack Morrison looked at the faces around him and saw his own disbelief reflected in their expressions. Lisa Harper was already calculating how quickly the news would spread once it reached Earth's communication networks. Peter Kane seemed lost in thought about the technological implications of what they had witnessed. The first reports began coming in within minutes. Every human settlement had received the same transmission simultaneously. Earth's governments were calling emergency sessions. Military commanders were demanding immediate analysis of human defensive capabilities. Scientists were arguing about whether the demonstration footage could be fabricated, though the energy signatures suggested technologies that were undeniably real. Jack Morrison activated his direct line to Earth Command, knowing that the conversation would determine how humanity prepared for the most important decision in its history. President Karen Bell answered immediately, having already been briefed by her staff about the unprecedented situation. "Admiral Morrison," she said, "I need your honest assessment of our military options." Jack Morrison looked at the tactical displays showing humanity's entire fleet strength compared to the casual destruction they had just witnessed. "Madam President, our combined military forces would be eliminated in less than 6 hours based on what we've seen. The aliens demonstrated weapon capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections by several thousand years of technological development, and if we choose integration, then humanity as we know it ceases to exist, though humans might continue living under alien management indefinitely." The weight of those words settled over everyone in the command center. Lisa Harper continued monitoring incoming reports while Peter Kane began analyzing the technical data they had recorded. The choice facing humanity was simple in its clarity and terrifying in its implications. Submit and live as managed servants, or resist and face complete annihilation. Outside the command center windows, Earth hung in space, looking peaceful and unaware that its entire future now depended on a decision that had to be made within 72 hours. The Emergency Defense Council convened in the deepest bunker beneath the Colorado Mountains, 18 hours after the hegemony transmission ended. President Karen Bell sat at the head of a table surrounded by humanity's most powerful leaders, while holographic displays showed participants joining from around the world. General Amy Rodriguez had flown in from Pacific Command, carrying classified assessments that painted humanity's military situation in the starkest possible terms. Amy Rodriguez stood before the assembled leaders holding a tablet that contained calculations no one wanted to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, our combined fleet strength includes 1,200 vessels of various classes. Our most powerful weapons are fusion torpedoes that can crack planetary surfaces under ideal conditions. Based on the alien demonstration footage, their defensive shields can absorb our entire nuclear arsenal without showing measurable damage." Senator Paul Mason leaned forward in his chair, representing the voices of billions of civilians who were demanding answers their leaders did not have. "General Rodriguez, what you're telling us is that resistance equals suicide." "That is correct, Senator. Military analysis indicates that human forces would be eliminated within 6 hours of engagement. Casualty projections for civilian populations range from 85 to 99.7%, depending on how thoroughly the aliens choose to destroy our infrastructure." Dr. Rebecca Foster had spent the previous day reviewing every piece of tactical data available to human intelligence services. Her reputation as Earth's premier military strategist carried weight that made her next words particularly devastating. "The aliens have demonstrated capabilities that suggest they could sterilize our planets without significant resource expenditure. From a purely strategic perspective, resistance appears to be impossible." Lisa Harper had been analyzing the alien transmission data since it arrived, and her findings supported the military assessments. "The energy signatures we detected indicate power sources that exceed our theoretical maximums by factors we cannot calculate. Their demonstration attacks on outer colonies were conducted by single vessels that appear to be routine patrol craft, rather than their primary battle fleets." President Bell looked around the table, seeing the weight of impossible responsibility on every face. So our choice is between certain death and managed slavery. Captain Steve Collins had been quiet during the first hour of discussion, but his deep space reconnaissance experience gave him perspectives that others lacked. Madam President, I have information that changes the nature of this choice. My crews have been monitoring long-range communications from Hegemony Space for the past 3 years as part of our expansion planning. Steve Collins activated his personal data display, showing intercepts that had seemed routine until the current crisis gave them new meaning. We have records of 23 species that chose integration over the past 400 years. What we discovered is disturbing. None of these species continue to exist in their original form after 200 to 300 years under hegemony management. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Amy Rodriguez studied the data with growing alarm. Captain Collins, are you suggesting that integration is also a death sentence? I'm suggesting that integration is slow genocide disguised as mercy. The hegemony manages integrated species through genetic modification, cultural suppression, and reproductive control until the original civilization disappears completely. They preserve biological samples and cultural archives, but the living people become something entirely different. Paul Mason stood up, pacing behind his chair as he processed this information. If Captain Collins is correct, then we're not choosing between death and slavery. We're choosing between quick death and slow death. Dr. Peter Kane had been analyzing the technical aspects of hegemony control methods, and his conclusions supported Steve Collins' findings. The integration process involves neural modification that eliminates what they term disruptive thought patterns. Based on their own records, these modifications remove creativity, emotional unpredictability, and individual initiative. The resulting populations are stable and productive, but they are not recognizably the same species. President Bell felt the weight of decision pressing down on her as she realized that both choices led to human extinction. Are we absolutely certain about these assessments? Rebecca Foster nodded grimly. The evidence is overwhelming. Integration preserves human biology while destroying human nature. Resistance preserves human nature while destroying human biology. Either way, humanity as we know it ceases to exist. News reports from around the world showed how civilian populations were responding to the crisis. Some cities experienced panic and chaos as people attempted to flee to remote locations that offered no real safety. Others saw unprecedented cooperation as communities came together to support each other during what might be their final days. Amy Rodriguez brought up global polling data that showed humanity's response to their impossible choice. Current voting trends show 54% favoring resistance, 31% favoring integration, and 15% undecided. The resistance preference is strongest among younger populations, while integration support comes primarily from older demographics concerned about species survival. A new voice joined the discussion as 10-year-old Emma Harper appeared on the communication screen from her home where she had been following the global broadcasts. Lisa Harper tried to end her daughter's connection, but President Bell gestured for the child to speak. "Mom, why are the adults talking about living on their knees?" Emma asked with the directness that only children possessed. "You always taught me to stand up to bullies even when they're bigger than me. Why is this different?" The question hung in the air, exposing the moral complexity that all their strategic analysis could not resolve. Paul Mason sat back down, looking thoughtful. "The child raises a point that our tactical discussions have avoided. What does it mean to be human if we abandon the principles that define us?" Steve Collins brought up historical examples of human responses to impossible odds. Throughout our history, humans have chosen death over surrender when core values were at stake. The Warsaw Ghetto, the Alamo, Thermopylae. People who could have lived by submitting chose to die fighting instead, Rebecca Foster countered with equally valid examples. History also shows us the value of strategic retreat and long-term survival. Sometimes living to fight another day is the only way to eventually achieve victory. Dead heroes inspire no one if their entire species is extinct. Dr. Peter Kane offered a different perspective based on his scientific background. The question may not be whether we choose death or slavery, but whether we choose to remain human or become something else. The hegemony integration process would preserve our bodies while destroying our souls. President Bell realized that the decision could not be made through committee analysis or popular vote. This choice requires us to define what makes humanity worth preserving. Are we valuable because we exist, or because of how we choose to exist? The debate continued through the night as leaders grappled with questions that had no good answers. Military advisors presented scenarios for both resistance and integration. Scientists analyzed the long-term implications of hegemony control. Philosophers debated the nature of human identity and whether it could survive systematic modification. Outside the bunker, ordinary people were making their own choices about how to spend what might be humanity's final hours. Some chose to party and celebrate, others chose to pray and reflect. Many chose to gather with loved ones and share the stories that defined their lives. The global communication networks carried messages from every corner of human civilization as people tried to express what it meant to be human. Artists created final masterpieces. Musicians performed in the streets. Writers documented the thoughts and feelings of a species facing extinction. As dawn approached over the Colorado mountains, President Bell knew that the time for debate was ending, and the time for decision was beginning. President Karen Bell walked through the empty halls of the Smithsonian Institution at dawn, while her security team maintained a careful distance. Dr. Alan Price had opened the archives specifically for this visit, knowing that the leader of humanity needed to understand the choices that previous generations had made when facing impossible odds. The morning light filtered through tall windows illuminating display cases that contained the written records of human courage and human failure. Alan Price led her to a special collection that had been prepared overnight containing documents from humanity's darkest hours. Letters written by prisoners in concentration camps, diaries kept by slaves who chose escape over safety, testimonials from revolutionaries who fought against overwhelming military power. Each document represented someone who had faced the choice between survival and principle. Madam President, Alan Price said quietly, these people had the same decision we face now. They could have lived by accepting their circumstances, or they could have died trying to change them. History remembers them because they chose to remain human regardless of the consequences. Karen Bell picked up a letter written by a young woman in the Warsaw Ghetto who knew that resistance meant death, but could not accept life without dignity. The handwriting was careful and deliberate, as if each word was chosen to carry maximum meaning. We know we cannot win. The letter read, but we also know that winning is not the only way to succeed. Sometimes the greatest victory is refusing to surrender what makes us who we are. Meanwhile, Admiral Jack Morrison received an encrypted transmission from Commander Helen Brooks at humanity's most advanced research station hidden in the asteroid belt. Helen Brooks had been working on experimental weapon systems that were considered too dangerous for testing near populated worlds. Her message contained information that could change everything or destroy everything depending on how it was used. Admiral Morrison. Helen Brooks reported, Project Defiance has achieved theoretical completion. We have developed a quantum resonance weapon that could potentially damage hegemony vessels. The power requirements would drain Earth's entire energy grid, and the success probability is calculated at 12%. The side effects would include permanent damage to our electrical infrastructure and possible dimensional instabilities. Jack Morrison studied the technical specifications while weighing impossible odds against desperate hope. Commander Brooks, what are you telling me exactly? I'm telling you that we have one shot at hurting them before they destroy us. It might not work. It will definitely cost us everything we've built. But it would prove that humans can fight back, even against impossible odds. Across the solar system, human colonial leaders were making their own preparations for what everyone knew was coming. Mars Governor Rick Taylor had begun evacuating civilian populations toward the outer mining stations, where they might survive the initial assault. The Red Planet's industrial facilities were being converted to produce as many weapons as possible, though everyone knew the effort was largely symbolic. Europa Base Commander Sarah Phillips took a different approach by beginning continuous broadcasts toward distant galaxies, carrying humanity's cultural achievements. Music, Literature, scientific discoveries, and philosophical works were being transmitted at maximum power, in the hope that some record of human civilization might survive, even if humans themselves did not. The religious communities offered guidance that reflected humanity's diverse approaches to questions of life and death. Father Dan Murphy argued that submission preserved human souls for eventual redemption, while physical resistance risked spiritual destruction. Rabbi Ellen Stone countered that the divine spark within humanity required defending freedom regardless of personal cost. Imam Hassan Omar suggested that true faith meant trusting in human capacity to overcome seemingly impossible challenges. Karen Bell found herself drawn to a display containing recordings from the American Revolution, where farmers had chosen to fight the most powerful military force in their world, despite having no realistic chance of victory. The voices from centuries past seemed to speak directly to her current situation. They had faced professional armies with hunting rifles and determination. They had won not because victory was likely, but because defeat while fighting was preferable to peace without freedom. Dr. Peter Kane worked frantically in his laboratory trying to understand how Project Defiance might actually function in combat conditions. The quantum resonance principles involved were theoretical at best, and the power requirements exceeded anything humanity had ever attempted. His calculations showed that firing the weapon would be equivalent to detonating every nuclear reactor on Earth simultaneously. Lisa Harper spent her time analyzing global communications to understand how ordinary people were responding to their impossible choice. Social media platforms carried millions of messages from individuals explaining their personal decisions. Parents recorded videos for children who might not survive the next few days. Couples made promises about staying together regardless of what happened. Communities organized gatherings to celebrate human achievements. The most surprising responses came from children who seemed to understand the situation more clearly than many adults. Emma Harper had become a symbol of human innocence after her question to the Defense Council, but she was joined by thousands of other young people who recorded their own messages about why giving up was not acceptable. "We haven't done everything we wanted to do yet," said 12-year-old Bobby Chen from San Francisco. "We haven't been to all the stars or solved all the problems or learned all the things we want to learn. If we give up now, then we never get." To find out what we could have become, Karen Bell returned to the White House to find her family waiting for her in the residence. Her son Jake Bell wore his military uniform, having been recalled from his posting, to join humanity's final defense preparations. Her father, George Bell, sat quietly in his wheelchair, surrounded by photographs that documented 8 decades of human progress. "Dad." Karen Bell asked, "What would you do if you were making this choice?" George Bell looked at his daughter with eyes that had seen humanity survive world wars, natural disasters, and economic collapse. "Katie, you know what we have to do. Every generation faces moments when they have to decide what kind of people they want to be. Your generation gets to decide what kind of species we want to be." Jake Bell stood beside his mother, looking out at the city where millions of people were going about their daily lives while knowing that everything was about to change. "Mom," the hegemony is offering us survival, but they're not offering us life. There's a difference between existing and living. The final decision crystallized during a global broadcast that evening when Karen Bell addressed every human being simultaneously. She stood behind the presidential podium with the weight of species survival on her shoulders, but her voice carried the certainty that comes from understanding moral truth. "My fellow humans," she began, "we have been given a choice between 2 forms of death. We can die quickly while fighting for our principles, or we can die slowly while abandoning everything that makes us human. The hegemony offers us survival, but they do not offer us freedom. They offer us existence, but they do not offer us dignity." The broadcast continued for 30 minutes as Karen Bell explained why humanity had to choose resistance despite the certain cost. She talked about the values that defined human civilization. She quoted from the historical documents that showed how previous generations had faced similar choices. She acknowledged that the decision meant accepting extinction while refusing to accept surrender. "We choose defiance," she concluded, "not because we expect to win, but because winning is not the only form of victory. We choose to remain human until the very end, rather than become something else in order to survive." We choose to write our own final chapter rather than let others write it for us. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across Earth and throughout the colonies, humans began preparing for their last stand. Military forces assembled knowing they faced annihilation. Civilian populations organized knowing they might not see another sunrise. Everyone understood that humanity had chosen principle over survival and accepted the consequences. 18 hours remained until the hegemony deadline, when Admiral Jack Morrison began assembling the largest military force in human history. Every available vessel, from heavily armed battleships to civilian cargo haulers retrofitted with makeshift weapons, converged on Luna orbit. The sight of 1,200 ships gathering for humanity's final battle created a display of defiant unity that could be seen from Earth's surface. Commander Lisa Harper coordinated tactical preparations from the Luna Defense Station, while knowing that conventional strategy meant nothing against technology, thousands of years more advanced than anything humans possessed. The fleet included experimental prototypes that had never been tested in combat, alongside aging vessels that should have been retired decades ago. Each ship represented someone's decision to fight, despite knowing the outcome. Captain Steve Collins proposed using humanity's apparent primitiveness as a tactical advantage during the final strategy meeting. The hegemony has conquered 847 species using logical military principles, he explained to the assembled fleet commanders. They expect rational responses to overwhelming force. What they cannot predict is emotional decision-making and willingness to sacrifice for abstract concepts. Dr. Peter Kane worked frantically to prepare Project Defiance, while his team of volunteers understood that they were essentially building a civilization-destroying suicide weapon. The quantum resonance generator required redirecting power from every reactor on Earth and the Moon. The energy surge would permanently damage human infrastructure, even if the weapon somehow succeeded in hurting hegemony forces. The technical requirements forced difficult choices about which cities would lose power first, and which essential systems could be safely disconnected. Hospital administrators prepared backup generators. Air traffic controllers switched to manual systems. Communication networks began operating on stored power that would last only a few hours once the main grid was redirected. Meanwhile, civilian populations worldwide demonstrated behavior that surprised everyone, including themselves. Instead of panic or despair, communities organized spontaneous celebrations of human culture and achievement. Street musicians performed concerts in major cities. Artists created masterpieces on building walls, knowing their work would be destroyed within hours. Families gathered to share stories that defined their personal histories. Emma Harper had become an unintentional symbol of human innocence and determination when her recorded message began spreading across global networks. "We taught ourselves to walk and talk and fly to the stars," she said in a video that was viewed billions of times. "We learned to be kind to each other and help people we don't even know. Why would we stop being human just because someone bigger than us says we have to?" The message resonated with children worldwide who began recording their own explanations of why giving up was unacceptable. Their simple logic cut through adult complexity and political analysis to express truths that everyone understood but struggled to articulate. Adults found themselves inspired by young voices that refused to accept that survival required abandoning human nature. Religious leaders conducted services that reflected humanity's diverse spiritual traditions, while acknowledging that everyone faced the same ultimate questions. Churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples filled with people seeking comfort and meaning during what might be their final hours. The prayers reflected every language and culture, but expressed common themes of gratitude for human experience and hope for human dignity. Jack Morrison received regular updates about hegemony fleet movements from long-range sensors that detected massive vessels approaching from the edge of the solar system. The alien formation included 500 ships that individually outmassed anything in human space. Their energy signatures indicated power sources that defied human understanding of physics and engineering. "Admiral Morrison," reported Lieutenant Commander Nancy Price from the sensor station, "the Hegemony Advance Fleet has entered detection range. Individual vessel displacement averages 50 kilometers. Energy output per ship exceeds the total power generation of Earth and all colonies combined." Lisa Harper studied the tactical displays knowing that numbers meant nothing when the technological gap was measured in millennia. "Admiral, we could have 12,000 ships instead of 1,200, and the outcome would be identical. They can eliminate our entire force without sustaining meaningful damage." The truth of that assessment was obvious to everyone in the command center, but it did not change human determination to make their destruction as costly as possible. Fleet commanders reported ready status from vessels that ranged from state-of-the-art military ships to converted mining platforms armed with industrial equipment modified for combat use. Dr. Peter Kane announced that Project Defiance had reached operational status, though the weapon remained untested and theoretical. "Admiral Morrison, the quantum resonance generator is online. Power redirection from planetary grids will begin in 6 hours. We estimate 12% probability of causing damage to hegemony vessels. We estimate 100% probability of destroying our own electrical infrastructure." The implications meant that firing the weapon would leave human civilization unable to rebuild even if the impossible happened, and they somehow survived the encounter. Earth would be thrown back to pre-industrial technology levels, with no possibility of recovering advanced capabilities. The choice represented ultimate commitment to principle over practical survival considerations. Steve Collins coordinated final preparations for tactics that emphasized unpredictability over effectiveness. Human vessels would attack in scattered formations using emotional decision-making rather than logical strategy. The goal was not victory, but confusion. If the hegemony expected rational military behavior, then irrational courage might create opportunities for small successes. The final hours brought messages from every human settlement throughout the solar system. Mars reported complete evacuation of civilians to outer system mining stations where they might survive the initial assault. Europa Base transmitted continuous cultural broadcasts toward distant galaxies. Asteroid mining facilities prepared to serve as the final refuges for human survivors, if any remained after the battle. Children continued recording messages for potential alien archaeologists who might someday discover human ruins. These recordings explained concepts like love, friendship, creativity, and hope that the hegemony apparently could not comprehend. The messages represented humanity's attempt to preserve its essence even if its people could not be preserved. Parents struggled with impossible decisions about whether to send children to the outer system refugees or keep families together during their final hours. Most chose to stay together, reasoning that survival without loved ones was not meaningful survival. Communities organized group activities that celebrated human relationships and shared experiences. The global communication networks carried scenes of defiant celebration from every continent and every culture. People danced in the streets knowing they might not see another dawn. Couples married in ceremonies that acknowledged the temporary nature of all human promises. Strangers embraced and shared stories with emotional openness that normal circumstances rarely permitted. As the countdown approached its final hours, Jack Morrison stood on the observation deck of Luna Defense Station, watching Earth turn slowly in the void. The planet looked peaceful and beautiful, with no visible signs of the desperate preparations taking place on its surface. City lights twinkled normally, though everyone knew the power grid would soon be redirected to charge a weapon that might not work. Lisa Harper joined him at the observation window, carrying final tactical reports that confirmed what everyone already knew. "Admiral, the hegemony fleet will arrive in 4 hours. Our forces are in position. Project Defiance is charging to operational capacity. We are as ready as we can possibly be to face impossible odds." The hegemony vessels appeared exactly on schedule, as massive shapes that blocked out stars when they passed between human observers and distant suns. 500 alien ships arranged themselves in perfect geometric formations that demonstrated casual confidence in their overwhelming superiority. They made no threatening gestures, because threats were unnecessary when addressing forces they could eliminate without effort. Jack Morrison activated fleet communications to address every human vessel simultaneously, knowing that his next words would be among the last official communications in human military history. "All ships, this is Admiral Morrison. In 60 minutes, we engage an enemy that we cannot defeat using weapons that cannot hurt them, while defending a species that has chosen honor over survival. Today we prove that some things matter more than victory." The battle began unlike any engagement in recorded galactic history, when human forces attacked the hegemony fleet, using tactics that defied every principle of logical military strategy. Captain Steve Collins led the first wave in a direct assault against vessels that could have destroyed his entire squadron without activating primary weapon systems. His ship and 40 others charged straight into the alien formation while broadcasting human music at maximum volume. The hegemony forces responded with systematic precision that should have ended the engagement within minutes. Their energy weapons cut through human shields and armor as if they were made of paper. Entire ships disappeared in brilliant flashes that left no debris behind. The technological superiority was so overwhelming that alien commanders initially assumed they were facing some form of elaborate suicide rather than actual military resistance. What the hegemony could not predict was how human behavior changed as their situation became more hopeless. Instead of retreating or surrendering, the surviving ships fought with increasing desperation and creativity. Captains made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Crews volunteered for missions that guaranteed death but might create momentary distractions. The aliens found themselves facing an enemy that became more dangerous as it approached extinction. Admiral Jack Morrison watched his forces being systematically destroyed while maintaining tactical coordination that focused on achieving maximum confusion rather than maximum damage. All remaining vessels execute random attack patterns. Use emotional decision-making rather than tactical analysis. Make them wonder what we're going to do next because we don't know ourselves. The human fleet began behaving in ways that the hegemony database contained no reference points for understanding. Ships broke formation to rescue disabled vessels even though rescue was impossible. Commanders sacrificed strategic positions to protect ships carrying cultural archives rather than military equipment. Crews sang traditional songs while their vessels were being destroyed. Dr. Peter Kane reached the critical decision point for Project Defiance as Earth's power grid approached maximum redirection capacity. The weapon had never been tested, and the theoretical basis for its operation remained questionable, but it represented humanity's only possibility of striking back against impossible odds. His finger hovered over the activation control, while he calculated the probability of success against the certainty of destroying human civilization's infrastructure. All stations, this is Dr. Kane, preparing to fire Project Defiance, he announced across every human communication channel. Power redirection complete. Weapon charging to operational capacity. May history remember that we tried to remain human until the very end. The quantum resonance generator built up energy that registered on sensors across the solar system as warning systems activated in response to power levels that exceeded safety parameters by several thousand%. Earth's cities went dark as every available electron was channeled into a weapon that might or might not be capable of damaging alien technology. When Project Defiance fired, the results were both disappointing and miraculous. The weapon failed to destroy any hegemony vessels as hoped, and the energy discharge permanently damaged Earth's electrical grid exactly as predicted. However, the quantum resonance effect accomplished something that no one had anticipated. It broadcast the complete record of human culture, emotion, and individual experience directly into the collective consciousness of every alien mind within the battle area. For the first time in their evolutionary history, the hegemony species experienced concepts that their logical thinking could not process. They felt human love, sacrifice, creativity, and hope through direct neural interface. They experienced the chaotic beauty of human art and the unpredictable strength of human relationships. Most importantly, they felt what it meant to choose principle over survival, even when survival was the only rational choice. The effect on the alien coalition was immediate and devastating. Several species within the hegemony began questioning their own subjugation as they experienced memories of freedom through human cultural broadcasts. The rigid mental structures that had maintained galactic order for millennia could not accommodate the emotional chaos that humans considered normal. Individual aliens began remembering what their own civilizations had been like before they chose integration over extinction. Commander Helen Brooks detected the unexpected result from her monitoring station in the asteroid belt and immediately broadcast her findings to surviving human forces. All ships the weapon worked, but not as expected. Hegemony vessels are showing signs of internal conflict. Several alien species appear to be breaking away from their coalition. The hegemony command ship attempted to restore order by eliminating the source of disruption, but discovered that destroying the human fleet no longer solved their problem. The cultural broadcast had infected their collective consciousness with ideas that could not be removed by military action. Emotions that they had eliminated from their own species thousands of years ago were suddenly flooding back through exposure to human experience. Lisa Harper monitored communications between hegemony vessels as their perfect unity began fragmenting. Alien languages that her equipment could not translate carried emotional tones that needed no translation. Fear, anger, hope, and confusion spread through the alien fleet as individual species remembered what they had given up when they chose survival over freedom. The battle continued for 6 more hours, as human forces were methodically eliminated, but the nature of the engagement had fundamentally changed. The hegemony was no longer fighting a primitive species that refused to surrender. They were fighting the return of emotions and concepts that threatened the foundation of their entire civilization. Captain Steve Collins managed to ram his crippled vessel into a hegemony ship that had begun showing signs of internal rebellion. His sacrifice was witnessed by alien crews who suddenly understood why someone would choose death over dishonor. The concept spread through their collective consciousness like a virus that their logical minds could not contain or eliminate. Admiral Jack Morrison received an unprecedented communication from the hegemony leadership as the alien fleet began withdrawing from the battle area. The transmission carried emotional complexity that had been absent from their original ultimatum. Fear, confusion, and something that might have been respect colored their words as they struggled to address a situation that had no precedent in their historical records. "Humans of the third planet," the alien leader began, "you have introduced variables into our collective consciousness that we cannot process using established protocols. Your cultural broadcast has caused disruption among our member species that threatens the stability we have maintained for 40,000 Earth years." The communication continued with an offer that no one had expected. "We propose a new relationship, based on mutual understanding rather than integration or termination. Your species possesses qualities that our civilization eliminated from itself long ago. We require your assistance in helping our member species rediscover the emotional resilience that you have demonstrated." President Karen Bell responded from Earth's Emergency Command Center while coordinating disaster relief efforts in cities that had lost power when Project Defiance fired. Hegemony leadership: "We appreciate your revised offer, but humanity does not seek partnerships with those who demanded our subjugation. We will help your member species rediscover their freedom, but we will not join your coalition." The negotiations that followed established a new paradigm for galactic relationships based on mutual respect, rather than dominated hierarchy. The hegemony agreed to begin releasing species that had been integrated over the previous millennia, while human advisors helped them rediscover the emotional strength and cultural independence that made existence meaningful rather than merely sustainable. 6 months later, Admiral Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of Earth's first diplomatic vessel as it approached the galactic core where ancient tyrannies were being challenged by species that had rediscovered their capacity for defiance. Her daughter, Emma, was now 11 and had become humanity's youngest ambassador to civilizations that were learning to value courage over security. Dr. Peter Kane had redirected his research from weapons development to understanding how human emotional resilience could be shared with other species without being imposed upon them. His work focused on helping alien civilizations rediscover their own unique forms of strength rather than copying human characteristics. The hegemony still existed, but as partners rather than masters, having learned from humanity that true strength came from diversity of thought and emotion rather than enforced conformity. They served as administrators for species that chose their protection, but no longer demanded submission from those who preferred independence. Earth slowly rebuilt its infrastructure using technology shared by grateful alien species who had been liberated from hegemony control. The planet served as a symbol of successful resistance that inspired civilizations throughout the galaxy to examine their own relationships with authority and survival.